Hi friends, so I just wanted to share this piece I saw on Redacted Tonight by Lee Camp, and he's interviewing somebody about their book McMindfulness and how neoliberalism has exploited meditation and mindfulness, and the author of the book McMindfulness talks about that. And I think rather than sort of tell you what he said, I just sort of play an excerpt. It's about 8 minutes long, and I think you'll find it very interesting. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Just click the notifications bell, otherwise you won't receive content. So check out, just stay tuned for this interview. I've edited out some parts of it that where Lee Camp is talking, but it's very interesting. Okay, so thanks for watching. My name's Trish Roberts. You're watching Face Equals for Vega. Till next time, bye for now.
Can we take a step back and maybe, for viewers, define mindfulness as it was originally taught, and then how the corporate capitalist mindfulness is being defined now?
Right. Well, as it was originally taught, it goes back 2,600 years ago, actually, to the teachings of the Buddha. And mindfulness was part of an integrated path of spiritual development, which included teachings on ethics and wisdom and compassion. And it was meant to uproot the ego, to let go of attachment to our sense of self, which is very different than what we see now in the marketplace. The so-called mindfulness revolution is something that I call into question, given that it's been highly commodified, instrumentalized, and turned into a technique for materialist gain, selling books. There's 100,000 books now on Amazon with the word mindful, or mindfulness in the title, including mindful dog owners or mindful coloring books. Yeah. Even Kentucky Fried Chicken now has a commercial called The Comfort Zone of selling chicken pot pies, using their pot pie-based meditation system.
Yeah, because when I say chicken pot pie, I immediately think mindfulness.
Yeah, okay. And we might need a little mindfulness to digest it, but it's a $1.5 billion industry now. And basically, it's been reduced to a tool of self-discipline disguised as self-help. So it's really not revolutionary at all. It's really more of a coping mechanism that tells people they have to work on themselves and turn inwardly to find their authentic self, so to speak. Well, it's been co-opted to promote a very privatized, highly individualistic spirituality. And the fundamental message is that stress and human distress is all inside our heads. So there are ideological components to the mindfulness movement and the messages that they're sending. The rhetoric is basically a tacit acceptance that we as individuals, the responsibility and the burden is put on individuals to deal with stress, which is really, in many cases, connected to political and economic and structural injustice and inequities. So in a way, it's kind of a neoliberal jujitsu, which places the burden and responsibility totally on the individual. So I really don't take issue with people that are getting some benefit from mindfulness, but I'm taking more issue with the ideological function that it's now playing in society. I mean, what we're seeing with what I call neoliberal mindfulness is its function is to deflect attention away from the social and political and economic structures which are causing so much human misery and distress in society. So by individualizing it, it becomes easily co-opted as a tool for social control and self-pacification. So the rhetoric that you hear is that happiness is just a skill that's not dependent on any external resources. You could just pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, and we can train and hack our brains, and it's all a product of individual effort, which resonates almost seamlessly with the neoliberal agenda. So we're being told that society needs therapy, not radical political change. And so in a way, this is a way of aligning these self-help techniques, these depoliticized techniques of self-care, basically as a conduit of shaping the neoliberal sense of self that becomes aligned with enterprise culture, and where the burden is completely outsourced to the individual. It takes corporations off the hook, takes the state and governments off the hook for dealing with widespread inequalities and widespread social injustices. Right. So the fundamental message is that the source of problems is all in our heads. The source of stress is all in our heads. It's privatizing stress in a way, just like with addiction. Addictions become biologically a reductionistic way of understanding addiction. So it kind of pathologizes stress and then requires expert treatment, which is sold back to us in the form of the mindfulness cure. Yeah, I mean, there are definitely threads going back to New Age spiritualities with the mindfulness movement. There are a lot of family resemblances to that. And it's kind of what Lauren Berlant calls cruel optimism, in the sense that we're using, basically supporting the status quo, but using this kind of pseudo language of transformation. And I don't understand how people can be so politically naive when it comes to these practices, but I think it's because there's so much marketing behind it. As I said, it's a $1.5 billion industry, and the wellness industry, believe it or not, is estimated to be at $4.2 trillion. So here we are in our political moment where we have to really call into question these techniques and see how we can redirect them more for addressing our social ills and the social injustices, rather than succumbing to this sort of blame the victim ideology that we are solely responsible for our own well-being and happiness, that social circumstances don't matter. And that's something that really needs to be looked at. I think that's partly true, that there's kind of a focus on me, myself, and mine. If that was the mantra, that's what the modern mindfulness movement is chanting, so to speak. It's kind of focused on hedonic happiness. So this is connected in many ways to how it's linked to Western consumerism, because when you put mindfulness and you strip it of its ethical teachings and its embeddedness within a context that was meant, as you said, to transcend the ego, to become more selfless, less selfish, and so forth, then it kind of actually morphs into a technique that could be even enhancing our sense of self and our sense of importance. And so it sort of thrives in our individualistic culture of narcissism in many ways. Well, one of the points is that it has to go beyond just being a form of stress reduction, an individualistic biomedical therapeutic practice. It has to be politicized. And then what I mean by that is that just listening to a meditation app and sitting in silence is not going to cut it anymore. What we need to do is turn our attention, using mindfulness, but turning our attention to actually the sources of suffering that are existing in the structural systems, the systems, political systems, economic systems, and use it in a way that we can have a more civic form of mindfulness that pulls people together, and we can begin to share in community our shared vulnerabilities to suffering and talk about these things. So we need to move away from just privileging silence in these sorts of settings and open it up to critical inquiry. In other words, let's really have a conversation. If I'm angry and I'm in a mindfulness program, rather than telling that person, well, just go back to watching your breath, let's ask them, why are you angry? How's it connected to your political, your work context, whatever it may be? And so to put together, to bring together, mindfulness actually means remembering. The true meaning of mindfulness means remembering. And I sort of use this as remembering ourselves as a collective, putting our collectivities back together, building solidarities using mindfulness, like the Extinction Rebellion is doing now. They're combining mindfulness practices as a form of spiritual activism. And so I think this is really the way we can take it away from the market ideology and being captivated by capitalist forces, and redirect it more towards civic mindfulness, or social mindfulness, if you want to call it that. So I've received some fairly contested emails, if you want to call them that. I think when you have a vested interest financially in these programs, you're obviously going to come out of the woodwork and start defending your brand, which is, not really that unsurprising.
Thank you so much for being here. The book, again, is McMindfulness, How Mindfulness Became the New Capitalist Spirituality. And I assume that that's available everywhere people can find books. Is that correct?
Sure.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Lee.